Welcome to Season 3 of Conversations with Kathy, the podcast for anyone who's looking for a place filled with honest conversations, tangible takeaways, and new perspectives on life, love, and everything in between. And I'm your host, Kathy Ann Roach. Let's jump right in. Kirk, Cambridge, Pesche can be considered the embodiment of hard work and sacrifice. With a portfolio that includes work with MAC Cosmetics, Beer Minerals, Broadway, tours, TV, Boston Ballet, Boston Lyrical Opera, the list goes on and on. Today, Kirk has made his Broadway debut as a makeup designer for the productions of Troubled Mind and Clyde's, and quickly followed up with Skeletal Crew. And for all his success, Kirk is a survivor. Talking about childhood abuse and rape is not an easy subject. Yet Kirk made it easy for us to flow through his story with such authenticity that we were able to talk about this very traumatic experience with all our emotions on show. We laughed, we paused, we reflected. Let's jump right in to my conversation with Kirk. So, Kirk, thank you so very much. Before I get into the meat of our conversation, I actually tell everybody everything that you do in terms of your whole portfolio of who you are. But there's one thing, Kirk, that I have to do before we start this podcast, and that's...
Put your lip color on.
Oh, yes, I have to get some gloss because Kirk makes sure that the lips are not
popping.
Yes.
I know. Lip conditioner all the way.
Thank you so much again. I know your story is one that is really powerful in terms of where you've come from. You know, when we sit on our little small Caribbean island, unfortunately for us tonight, I'm hearing my dog barking in the back there. So we have some real Caribbean ambiance here, you know?
Yeah.
For you growing up in St. Vincent, did you ever dream the life that you have right now?
You know, I knew that my life was going to be something spectacular. I did not know the journey it was going to take. I didn't know the steps. I didn't know the route. I knew that it was going to be bigger than anything my mother, my father, my grandmother, anything that I could imagine. I knew growing up that if I could imagine it, I could achieve it. I was taught that from a young age.
Yeah.
I was taught to live in my magic. So when other people were told, oh, don't do this, and oh, that's stupid, I didn't have that. I had a mother and a grandmother who supported my dream that I could be whatever. I didn't have to be a doctor or a lawyer. I mean, I wanted to be a doctor until I saw blood, and I was like, oh, fuck. And then, I studied accounting, business and accounting, and then for that was the audit department for Senator Grundy. And so I thought that was going to be my life. And then I came to the States. My mother dies when I was in high school, and my father files for me. Years later, the papers come through, and I fought. I was like, I didn't want to go. I was like, where am I going to go? I already started building this life.
Yeah.
And I was involved with someone. So my mother died when I was a teenager. I'm now a young adult. I find out like 7 years later that my mother's ashes were never buried.
Wow.
And I'm like now 20. I'm 20 years old. I find out my mother, who died when I was 14, her ashes were still in the funeral home in a closet.
Wow.
And this guy, Mr. Gill, held on to the ashes this whole time because he said that my mother's brother told him to throw the ashes in the gutter.
Oh.
And he told us, my sisters and I, that he had them buried because in the family plot, because he didn't want to traumatize us again. Right? Anyway, 7 years later, we find out that the ashes were never buried. So my sister Kimala and I go, we get the ashes, we bury them. I leave the next day to come to the States. So my life begins after I bury my mother. I promised myself I would not look back. And I sat on that plane. It was American Eagle. It was the last American Eagle flight to ever leave St. Vincent.
Yeah.
And I did not look out of the window. I didn't look to see who was waving. I didn't look, I was just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I landed in New York. And the next day, my sister takes me to the mall, to
Mm-hmm.
King's Plaza Mall, and I get a job with MAC Cosmetics,
Mm.
right? 6 months later, I become a product specialist, number one salesperson in the company. A year later, I become an assistant manager. And I
Mm-hmm.
kept growing every 6 months. I got promoted.
Yeah.
Was
Now,
with them for
before
10
you
years.
go on to tell me
Mhm.
about your rise, I know that sometimes when we tell our stories, most people think that success seems to start, like you said, I was a young boy on a Caribbean island, and then I flew on a plane and I got to New York. And now, and then I'm on Broadway. And you're like, oh. And people go, well, how is that not happening for me? You know? Tell me a little bit more, because I know that you had
About
a little bit growing up.
pre-America.
Yeah, pre-American. I know you had a little bit of trauma, because I
So,
know that for some of us and for some of the people listening, sometimes when things like that happen to them, or if they're in the middle of it, or it has happened, it dims their spirit, it dims their
uh-huh.
light. Tell me a little bit about what happened and tell me how you came out of the darkness of that period.
So I'll tell you that leading up to that, I
Mm,
had a grandmother and a mother who fortified who I was from
yes.
childhood, from
Mm-hmm.
infancy, from birth, right?
Yeah.
That I was good enough. I
Mm-hmm.
was good looking enough.
Mm-hmm.
I was enough,
Yeah.
right? So I've always known that I was enough, even if other people didn't think it.
Yeah.
I was taught to understand and say to myself, I'm smart enough, I'm good looking, I am intelligent, I'm this and that, I'm confident.
Yeah.
So those things were already reinforced in me by the time I was 8.
Right.
So when my trauma started, this is someone who is my mother's nephew. He was the prize bull, as it were. Everybody in
Mm.
the family loved him. He was the one who looked like my mother's mother. So he
Mm.
looked white. He was blue-eyed. He had the soft hair. My grandfather loved him. My mother loved him. Everybody loved him. All my cousins
Yes.
loved him.
Yes.
And for some reason, I never did. And I'm talking like from before, just something about him I just never trusted from childhood.
Yeah.
So when the trauma started, I was 8 when it
Mm.
started, and it started with isolation. It
Mm-hmm.
started with isolating me from the other cousins. And because he was the popular one and the one everybody loved, he was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
Kirk has a clue. And you're 25 years old, 24, 25 years old. I'm 8.
Wow. Yeah.
So you're using these tactics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the trauma started, right? And so whenever he came home from Canada, it was just like, oh my God, I don't want this person to come. The minute they say this fucker is coming home,
Yes.
I want to just go into a ball somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It was the bane of my existence.
Yes.
Whenever it's a carnival coming and I know he coming home, I just want to dead,
Yes.
right? So, it was like the things that, oh, you ugly, oh, you black, oh, you this, oh,
Mm.
you that. That didn't affect me.
Mm-hmm.
What affected me was the threats. Because an 8-year-old would say, 8-year-old, oh, you'll kill them if they tell, you will hurt your mom,
Yes.
you will hurt your
Yes.
sister. To drown a cat in front of someone and say, that'll be you. To kill a dog in front of someone and
Oh
say, that'll
my.
be
Oh
you.
my.
Those are the things that affected me on that
Yes.
level.
Yeah.
So the darkness part wasn't that I didn't believe in myself. It is that if I
Mm-hmm.
was to tell one, who will believe me?
Yes. Yeah.
Because this person is the prize. This person is everybody loves them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So nobody gonna believe you. One,
Yeah.
two, this person may hurt me or they may hurt my mom or my sister.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the secret kept and it went on for years. And when I
Mm.
was about 12, came home where we had this business in Beckway called Harpoon Saloon. And I was closing up the downstairs bar and out of nowhere he appeared.
Mm.
And I was just like, I thought of every which way to escape this human. I was like, maybe if I run off the jetty and jump in the water and swim up the side, I can climb up the
Yeah.
side of the cliff, or I could swim around the bay, or I could do this, or I could run around. And everything in my head in a millisecond, I had like 1,000 different ways to escape. And then out of nowhere, my cousin says, I heard my cousin upstairs, Kirk, where you doing? And I said, I'm down here. So she comes downstairs and she said, why
Yeah.
you sound so scared? And then she sees him. And she's like, oh, I didn't know you were coming. And he's like, yeah, this guy, Kirk, extra dramatic.
Oh,
And they hug and they go upstairs, right?
yes.
And that was the last time I saw him for many years. When I was about 19, I was walking in the market one Saturday and I saw him in the market, like going to the bus station, Little Tokyo side.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, you should come over for a drink, right? So it was Christmas time. He comes, sits in the
Mm-hmm.
veranda. I take him a drink.
Mm-hmm.
As I put the drink in his hand, I started rehashing
Yes.
everything.
Yeah.
He sat and he listened. He drank his drink. Girl, it was a sci-fi movie.
He was a
He
great
drank
one
his
too. That's the power thing they
sinister.
have, huh?
Oh my God. Sinister. And he sat there and he said to me, when I finished talking, he said, that was a figment of your imagination.
Wow.
I took it and I said, you know what? It's okay. And I put it to the back of my head. I told my grandmother for the first time. And my grandmother said, I always knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what it was. And I got therapy when I came to the States. You deal with it, you put it aside, you move on with your life. It
Mm-hmm.
affects certain aspects of your life in terms of like sexually, it
Yeah.
affects how you receive a touch.
Oh,
Someone
yes.
touching you makes you cringe.
Yeah.
Someone talking about your looks makes you sick to your stomach. That kind of thing. So even when I was a model, there were certain things that just didn't gel for me. You know what I mean? People talking about my looks was like, ugh,
Yeah.
or like someone touching me was just like always like ugh, cringy, and you just crawl into yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you go through the bouts of depression, and when I made the post about what happened a few days ago, some of my old schoolmates came on. They're like, "Oh my God! Like now I
Yes.
understand." You know what I mean? Like if you read through the responses, you see
Yes.
people who knew me as a child and just like, "Oh my God!"
Yeah.
Like I always wondered what was wrong. Now I
Yes.
know. Like you
Mm-hmm.
dealt with that so well.
Mm-hmm.
And so you learn to cope, but people don't know what you've been through. They make assumptions and assertions and whatever assumptions they need to make. My route was different because I had the confidence factor, and I had that base. There's some people who fall apart and go to drugs and
Yes.
prostitution, and
Yeah.
that was not my route.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, because it's difficult to process, especially because you're doing it alone. You are not sharing with anyone. It's not as though you've told
Mm-hmm.
a friend. You
Mm-hmm.
just all of this is just inside. So it
Mm-hmm.
takes a certain level of strength to get
Mm-hmm.
past that moment and to move on. And I guess for you, maybe it's still sometimes a work in progress because this person is looking you in your face and gaslighting you. So it's like, I don't know what I don't know what that was. And you're probably like, what? It's
It is. It takes a
crazy.
lot because it's like, in those moments you understand murder. You really
Yes.
do. You
Yes.
understand murder. In that
Yeah.
moment, you understand what murder looks like
Yes.
and
Yes.
why.
Yes.
You understand justified homicide, but you have to be outside yourself in that moment. And I was always able to step outside myself and see things from a different perspective. What if? What are the options here? You know what I mean? I'm growing. I'm now grown. This can't happen again. I'm an adult now. Like I could say no and I could speak out. So those are the things that were my saving grace.
Yes. Yeah.
And you still go through the depression. There are moments. I was talking to someone today, a friend of mine called and was telling me about a situation.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, how do you do it? And I was like, I'm not saying that you completely get over it. I was like, there are moments.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to allow anyone into my life. That's true. I don't trust very easily. I don't trust men at all.
Yeah.
I truly don't trust men. And the few who I've let close were disappointment.
Yeah.
And so therefore you have trust issues, you're serious trust issues.
Yeah.
I trust women 100 times more than I trust men. I'm very selective about who I allow into my life.
Yes.
That has always been a part of who I am. And I think it's really been a saving grace in terms of career and my personal space. But childhood rape definitely, definitely fucks you up.
Yeah. Yeah. What has been some of the strategies that you have used to cope? Like you said, you mentioned some of it, having that sense of self, taking a little bit more control or understanding where your control is and where your power is. That's the word I'm looking for, knowing where your power
Yep.
is. And
Mm-hmm.
is there anything else that you would say helped you to kind of shed, leave behind a little bit and push forward in terms of now
Being
starting to find joy in the other aspects of your life?
being able to speak to other people and to share my experience and have other people share theirs, because that really is a healing mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
People feel that, oh, it's shame. I mean, I don't feel any shame over it anymore. I
Yeah.
felt shame about it. That's why I didn't talk about it, because I felt like it was my fault.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
felt like what happens with a pedophile, a predator, they project on you the lie that they were told and that they've come to believe
Yes.
as truth. And so you inherit this lie
Yeah.
that I did something wrong. The
Yeah.
reason why they did that to me was it was my fault.
Yeah.
I was to blame. It's like any rape victim.
Yeah.
You feel like it was your fault. Your pants were too short. Your top was too tight.
Yeah.
You had a little bit too much of a switch in your hip. Your bouncy jump a little too much, like something.
Yeah.
I was too high in the instep. My lips was too big. My cheekbones,
Yeah.
something. You find something, because that's what they will tell you. You is the reason why.
Yeah.
And so I had to come to that through therapy. I realized, I understood. I didn't realize. I understood that it was not my fault. I was not complicit. I was not at fault. It was not my doing. I understood that for many years. Did I believe it? Is another
Mm-hmm.
thing,
Yeah.
right? So you still believe something else. You understand because you're grown
Yes.
up now and you can
Yes.
understand,
Mm-hmm.
but you do not believe it. And so it took me going home in 2018 December for my sister's wedding,
Mm-hmm.
and for his mother and my uncle and younger aunt to misbehave at my sister's wedding
Right.
for me to snap,
Yeah.
because hey now, that was the aha
Yes.
hallelujah moment.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So the aha hallelujah moment was
Mm-hmm.
that moment where it is beyond the aha moment,
Yeah.
because it is clear as daylight that this is Ephraim.
Yeah.
And so it took me, so after that, my sister went on her honeymoon. They came back a few days later, and I started talking. Just out of just be like, this is what it is.
Yeah.
Did you guys know? I want to tell
Oh,
y'all something.
yes. Yes.
And my cousin could not handle it. Like, she got up and left.
Yeah.
She got up and left. And my sisters sat there in awe. And they were like, you never said a word. They couldn't believe. They were just like, Kirk,
Yes.
you went through this, like, and we were around, and you never uttered a word all of these years into our teens, into our young adulthood. And we're now in our late 30s and 40s, and you're telling us this. And I was just like, it's time. And so it was just so funny, because while I was in St. Vincent for the next couple of days, I was trying to go live. Girl, Facebook would not cooperate. And
Yes.
the minute I left and I got to St. Lucia the first morning, girl, I felt like that night, I felt like something was sitting on my chest. I couldn't breathe. And I got up in the morning and I walked in the bathroom and I saw my 8-year-old self in the mirror looking back at me. And the
Yeah.
conversation happened.
Yeah.
And it was just like, you could not save us. then.
Yeah.
Was not your fault. It was a lie. It was someone else's lie that they passed on to you.
Yeah.
And it's time for you to talk and tell your story. And so I did a live. I think my live was maybe like an hour and 30 minutes. And I talked about it.
Join me for part 2 as Kirk discusses what happened after he shared his story online. Thank you for listening to Conversations with Kathy. If you like the show, be sure to like, rate, and review. It helps others just like you to find the show. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram as Kathy Ann Roach, or in my Facebook group, Conversations with Kathy, where we connect live, discuss the episodes, and share tips for improving our lives. So until next time.